Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy Myers. I'm the Managing Director of Art Book Publishers Lund Humphries, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the online launch of our new book, The Art of Richard Eurich by Andrew Lambirth. Thank you very much for joining us for what is certainly Lund Humphries' first online book launch, so it's very exciting. On behalf of the Lund Humphries team, I'd like to start by thanking a few very key people without whom this book would not have been possible. Firstly, obviously, our author, Andrew Lambirth. Andrew has written a really insightful text on Eurich's work, which looks at the overview of the work from all periods for the first time. And he worked closely with the Eurich estate throughout the process, and his text draws in particular on the artist's unpublished autobiography and diaries in the Eurich family archive. Thanks also to photographer and filmmaker extraordinaire Paul Carter for his invaluable help with new photography for the book. The book includes 169 illustrations, and many of those are works by Eurich, which are published here for the first time. And Paul has also masterminded the production of a wonderful new film about the book, which will be shown you this afternoon. And that will introduce you to some of the highlights of works reproduced in the book. And a very special thanks to the Richard Eurich estate, represented by his two daughters, Philippa Bambach and Caroline Martin, who have really tirelessly supported this book in so many ways throughout its long gestation, and with whom we worked closely throughout the book's production. I'm now very pleased to introduce our panel for this afternoon's event, who you can now all see on the screen. Jamie Anderson is Director of Waterhouse and Dodd Gallery and is joining us, as you can see, in fact, live from the Savile Row Gallery, where there is at the moment a small exhibition of paintings and drawings by Eurich, and you can see, I think, some highlights in the background. Jamie will be giving us an exclusive Zoom preview of the exhibition. He will then be talking to our second panellist, Philippa Bambach, Richard Eurich's daughter, about the process of putting the book together. And that will be followed by a screening of our new film. And I'm delighted that Frances Spalding has been able to join our event this afternoon. Frances will be known to many people in our audience, I'm sure. She is a critic, an art historian with a special interest in modern British art, and will be able to give us her particular perspective on Richard Eurich's work. There will be time at the end to ask questions. Please raise them using the Q&A function in Zoom, which is on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's it from me. I'm now very pleased to hand over to Jamie live from the gallery.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy. It's a great pleasure to welcome everyone to our exhibition, although clearly it's a very unusual event. Ordinarily, and we've done a few book launches in the past, and obviously a great number of exhibitions, we would launch these events with a large private view. And indeed, many of the people, I see there's already quite a number of attendees here, but many of you will have attended the private view that we hosted at our Albemarle Street Gallery for an exhibition of Richard's late works last year. So it's, in a way, it's very sad that we're not able to produce a similar event to mark, you know, this book launch now. And whilst we're very keen to welcome visitors to the gallery, in fact, quite a few people have already been, it's sad that we can't provide Richard's family and Andrew Lambirth and Lund Humphries with the formal book launch that, that this wonderful publication deserves. That said, I think there's quite a few advantages to this sort of new way of dealing with things. I always found that private views were problematic. It's nearly impossible to see any artworks. You spend much more time actually looking at the back of someone's head. And it's not always possible to talk to the people who are really involved in the project. And at least using this forum, if you like, you have our undivided attention. You can ask us any questions that you like, as Lucy suggested. What we want to do is lead you through, first of all, the installation of the exhibition. Is a very short kind of stop motion film that we put together. And then introduce you, as Lucy said, to the people who made this project happen. So I won't, I'll use this as a formal cue for Lund Humphries to start the stop motion video of the show. It's only a small part of it, but I hope you enjoy it.
The installation of an exhibition is always a particular treat for me, which may come as a surprise to some. It's an opportunity to really examine the artworks. Close proximity to the paintings and drawings reveals scarcely visible details, such as erased pencil lines or faint underpainting, the sort of thing you wouldn't notice in a casual glance or in reproduction. Furthermore, it's fascinating to learn which paintings work well together. The best laid exhibition plans are often revised many times in the hanging process, and interesting juxtapositions of works can reveal new interpretations. I confess, I've never been a great fan of private views, which are fundamentally ill-suited to the appreciation of art. My guilty pleasure is revelling in being the first to see an exhibition, in isolation, and perfect peace and quiet. But now I've had my moment with the paintings, and be more than happy to step aside and let others enjoy the paintings as much as I have.
I think it would be, at this point, what we want to do really is perhaps introduce Philippa into the proceedings, and we can talk a little bit about how the book actually came about and her experiences of putting the book together and actually living with Richard's work. So I shall wait for Philippa. Hello, Philippa.
Hello. Oh.
I think the first thing that I really wanted to know, or was going to ask you about, was really your experiences of growing up with Richard Eurich as your father, you know, being surrounded by all of these works. And so what was that like? Because obviously that was, in a sense, that's the first part of the book process, was becoming aware of these works. Was there a particular piece, for instance, that you remember from very early on in your childhood?
Well, I suppose, in fact, a picture which we fleetingly saw in that video going around the gallery, which is an early portrait of my mother, well before I was born, which has just got a wonderful quality of stillness. It's she's sort of turned away, but her head is sort of coming round, as it were, and it's very, very gracious and graceful. She's wearing an antique dress that they found in a junk shop. And as my son said, it's painted with love, he said. It is a very beautiful, still picture. But interestingly enough, again, I don't remember this myself, but Dad said that it was originally full length, and it's painted on a wood panel. So he just took a saw to it at some point and cut off the bottom.
Yesterday, there was one of the visitors, we had a few people in yesterday, one of our visitors yesterday actually commented, because they knew you, commented on the family likeness. You know, they see something of you in the picture of your mother, which I thought was rather nice. You know.
Yeah, maybe when I was younger too. Yes, so our family was in a world of its own, basically. I mean, Dad worked office hours every day. We had to keep quiet and everything, but he also did gardening, vegetables in the back garden, and wonderful bright flowers in the front garden, walking the dog, going to the local shops. But then we would, in the evenings, we'd mostly listen to concerts on the radio. It was all very, very quiet and staid. I realised, you know, when I went to school, that other people's lives were slightly different. But my mum would occasionally protest but mostly she was extremely supportive. She was the very sociable one, and she had a range of exceptionally interesting people, friends, you know. And we had things like rehearsals in our house for the Christmas mumming play, which would go around the pubs, and there would be play reading in the garden in the summer and dressing up. And we held the local WEA lectures here too in our house, which may sound as if it was quite lively, but on the whole, the tenor of life was very quiet, and we were always told that we were poor. We didn't have a TV, we didn't have a fridge, no washing machine, and definitely no central heating.
So, I mean, when we first met, pretty much the first thing that you said to me before we discussed any exhibitions or any terms of represent, anything to do with the business side of things, the first thing you said to me was just how important this book was, and that what you really wanted was some sort of home for it when it was eventually published. Can I ask, what was the primary motivation for you and Caroline in putting this book together? What did you hope to achieve from the book?
Well, we got so used to this sort of chorus of critics saying, oh, we've just rediscovered Richard Eurich. And Andrew, I think, nails it to a certain extent, because he says that as Dad was developing his style and exploring all the way to the very end of his life, so he's not easily labelled. And it's very gratifying for people to be able to label an artist and say, oh, he did blah, blah, blah. And so he upset that in many ways. And of course, he suffered from the abstract period when everything had to be abstract. But, you know, he has been rediscovered. And we just want to make sure that more and more people find him. I mean, already people who have got the book already have said, oh, we're just so amazed. We had no idea he did this range of pictures. You know.
I've actually had similar comments just this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that sense, it's very, very valuable.
Yes, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I have to say at this point, I mean, I know Lucy's already thanked Paul, but Caroline and I, with the best will in the world, are not the best people for getting a large project off the ground or understanding technicalities or, you know, the real world, in fact. And he's been an immense force for us. We wouldn't have got here without him.
Well, we shall raise a virtual glass to Paul as well. He's been a huge help to me on just from the gallery side of things as well, always being there with great images as well.
Yeah.
Whilst on that subject, because of course Paul was very, very central to the discovery or rediscovery of quite a few works. In this whole process, which has been done, I guess, in conjunction with trying to build some sort of catalogue raisonné in some form of Richard's works. Obviously, to produce a book of this significance and size, you need to have a fair idea of what's out there and where it is. You know, so were there any particular works that you discovered or rediscovered during this process that you were particularly pleased to see again, or find that are safe and well, if you like, or pieces even that you'd never even really known before? Well,
we did. I mean, it was once this project was up and coming and we were getting messages out that we wanted any people who had Eurichs to get in touch with us. I mean, we did have some amazing surprises, and you know, it was so exciting. But we started also rediscovering, and for me in particular, it's a picture which figures in the video that follows, which I hope people will bear with, because it's a maybe a bit slow in its motion, but it's a picture which is in the Tate called Beach with Bathers, which is an extraordinary picture, which has been down in the archives there since the 80s. And in fact, you know, we didn't even know it was there. So it did get discovered because it wasn't, you know, when BBC Your Paintings went round, it got missed out at that point. But anyway, they have, the Tate has photographed that picture, and it's just wonderful to see that one again. So we have panned along it.
Yeah.
It's like a frieze. And,
I know that, yes, it's very effective. I know that picture.
Yeah, so people will have to bear with us that it's partly my delight in it that's made that we've done it in that way.
But in a way, I think that's quite a neat way, I think, to actually try and introduce the video that you and Paul and Caroline have spent so long trying to finesse and put together.
Yeah.
And what I found really interesting about, if I may offer some sort of introduction, is that a lot of this kind of art history, if you like, can be rather dry. And then when you hear an artist's voice speaking about their own work, it just brings everything together a little bit. So I think that's one of the things that's so rewarding about this.
Yes, we haven't ironed out any of his ums and long pauses because we felt that was very part of his character.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of ums and long pauses. I'm sure I'll come up with a few during the next half an hour anyway. So, but perhaps it's a good time to for you and I to exit briefly, and we can watch.
I never did any painting actually at the Slade. I didn't like the painting. I suppose this is rather a conceited idea. But it's good to have something to kick against in a school. I was very interested in musical instruments at that time, particularly old musical instruments like lutes and field-de-gampers, harpsichords and things like that. And I drew quite a lot of interiors with figures, with instruments of this sort. I was at a boarding school during the 1914-18 war, and I used to do little tiny pictures of naval battles and air battles and Zeppelin raids on London and things of that sort then. It seems rather funny to think, as I was war artists in the next war. Well, towards the end of the war, as I think I've said, I began to get really a little bit bored. I wanted a slight change after 4 or 5 years, 5 years of painting at really considerable tension, you know. And various family things had happened, like my father dying and a small baby daughter dying and so on within a few weeks of each other. I felt a change somehow was necessary. And I painted a number of small paintings for children, which I thought children would be amused at, and they were exhibited at the Redfern Gallery, and I think almost every one of them was sold. As I say, I wasn't very good at teaching, but I learnt a lot there about painting, and I think it began to, you know, revive me considerably. I was always interested in the structure of water, which interested me almost as an obsession. I liked watching waterfalls and even just rock pools in motion, and of course the sea beating up against jetties and things of that sort. I could just watch for hours. And I think as one gets older, one certainly uses less and less variety of colours. All the great colourists eventually, like Titian and company, used less and less colours because they knew exactly how to put one thing against the other.
Welcome back, and hopefully in any second now, Francis Spalding will join. Hello, Francis.
Hi, Jamie.
Hello. I think what we would like to discuss, we've talked about the book project a little bit, you know, the kind of mechanics of it and why it took place. But I think for a lot of people, it'd be very interesting to examine a little bit more about Richard and his place within art history, particularly British art history. And I think you're you know, you're extremely well qualified to answer some of these questions for us. But before we go into that, perhaps you could share something about Richard's work from a personal perspective. You know, in what way does it speak to you? I've got that phrase in front of me, but what personally really resonates with you with Richard?
Well, I think, as we've been able to see from some of the pictures that have already been shown us, that he was brilliant at stretching a picture, of moving the eye across a great deal of space, and you know, an extraordinary orchestration of the picture, pictorial space, really fantastic. The one painting we haven't seen is that famous one in Nottingham called The Men of Straw. And it's a fabulous painting because it's got a very dark, stormy sky. It suggests at night time because it's so richly painted with navy blue, deep navy blue, near black colour, with streaks of pink showing through. And so you immediately think, gosh, this is dramatic, what is going on? Well, he's used a double square. Well, that's not as long as the beach scene that we've just been seeing in the film, but it's still quite a difficult shape to fill satisfactorily because the painting's in danger of falling into two halves. But he brilliantly brings it together, and you really find your eye, in order to understand what's going on in the scene or to begin to guess at what's going on, you have to move all the way around it because it's called Men of Straw. There's a sort of machine that's popping as the straw is being taken up off a rick and dropped into a field, and all kinds of creatures are being shaped or formed or deformed. It's not possible to know whether there's any violence going on or not, but something very strange is going on. And in the background, there's crowds developing, but they're staying close to the dry stone wall in the far distance, so as not to get too involved. And there's a whole sort of mystery and drama in this picture. It's incredibly intense, as so many of his works are. It's hard to sort of put a label on it as to what exactly is happening. You can't actually know what is happening, but it stirs in you a sense of drama and mystery and excitement.
I think, I mean, one word that you use there is label. It's another thing that Philippa mentioned in, you know, her description of why she wanted the book to be out in the public domain, if you like, is because of the struggle people have with labelling Richard as an artist or fitting him into some sort of preconceived box. One such label which has been attributed to him is as a visionary artist. Do you think this work applies to his painting, and if so, what do you think is precisely meant by that?
I think, I mean, as we've seen from the pictures already, he is a very varied artist. He can paint the sea in a very illusionistic almost way, very true to our experience of it in nature. In his late works, the sea becomes a symbolic, I think, terrain to express a certain emotional or hidden sort of feelings and so on. So it is very difficult to label him, and he doesn't belong to any group. He seems to have very determinedly kept his identity separate from any group formation. I think the other problem with us before the production of this book is that there was very little information available to him on him easily. If you managed to get hold of his solo exhibition, the catalogues to his exhibitions, you do so sometimes find information and quotations and remarks by him, but that wasn't really available to the public. So he's been a kind of hidden figure since his death. And I'm so glad that this book has been published because it's brought him to life, and the richness of the book with all its illustrations gives you this wonderful conspectus of his career.
I think the illustrations are particularly strong, and actually having a number of the works that are illustrated in the book actually physically here in front of me or behind me, you know, I can see just how good the reproductions are. So I think people are, obviously you don't get a sense of scale, but people are going to get a very clear sense of him as a kind of colorist.
I think the word scale is interesting in relation to his art, because he does seem to know exactly the size of things to put in their position. He loves incident, he loves things going on, but often it's very small. There's a picture called Rescue of the Only Survivor of a torpedo merchant boat. And really it's an entire landscape, because the sea and the land go right up to the top of the picture. So there's no chance of escape into the sky or seeing a horizon. And in this sort of little estuary that between the rocks, we see the wreck of a boat. And then on a rock, we see a tiny little figure throwing a little lasso out to an even smaller figure who's half sort of sitting in the water, half unable to get up. And then even smaller are the tiny figures watching from the top of the cliffside further on down in the picture. So everywhere you move in this picture across vast areas of space, there's a sudden beautifully positioned detail of the drama or the incident that pulls you up sharp. But it also shows you how small we are, how important this drama is, but it takes place in a much, much bigger landscape. And so that sense of scale and what it does to your understanding of the picture is very interesting.
I think that in the later works, you quite often see that the figures have become rather spectral. You view them from behind, yes. They're looking out to sea. So you can sort of read into that what you will, but it has both a sort of a symbolic quality, but also the idea, it's a technical thing, isn't it? Because if the light is coming from the other side, that will inevitably sort of shrink the figures down. So he's very clever in the way he paints, even very late on.
Yes, there's one painting of a naked man and woman in a room, a very ordinary room with a window and a chest of drawers and so on, and carpet, and she's looking out of the window, so her back is towards us. And it's quite impossible to put a psychological interpretation on that picture. You might wonder if it's a kind of updated Adam and Eve situation, and the attraction of the trees outside in the garden being symbolic of the tree and of the story of Adam and Eve. But you can't be precise as to what's going on. And if you want this word visionary to come into your talk about him, then it is someone who's dealing with not just appearance, but a sense of significance that goes beyond appearance, and which somehow seems to hold within it the fullness of a particular moment. In that sense, I do think he is, every now and again, quite often, a visionary artist.
Oh, very good. I think for some people that Richard Eurich is almost a quintessentially English artist. And obviously some of the books that you've written in part of Vanessa Bell and John Minton, that's a sort of tag, if you like, that could be applied to them in some way. Do you think that's fair, or is it just too kind of nebulous a concept? And if it is fair, what is that quality, aside from the fact that he's painting views of the English landscape?
Yes, I think this book has shown me once again how extraordinary, diverse and imaginative vitality the art between the wars has, and in Richard Eurich's case, after the war as well. And it's been underplayed for so long because of the emphasis on modernism. We fail to see the riches in these artists like Eurich. So that's one of the things, I think. What was the other thing you just asked then?
Just whether we could the Englishness of it.
Yes.
Is there something?
Yes.
Really...
Well, I mean, I was fascinated to hear his daughter Philippa talk about how they had rehearsals for the Christmas mumming plays in their house, because I think he loved all those sort of traditional things that are part of English tradition and English culture, particularly from the grassroots up. And he often has mumming figures in at least one of his paintings. So there is a sense that if there is a weirdness in his art, which Andrew Lambirth so well identified, that it comes not from the surrealist attempt to dig into the subconscious and unexploded desires and things, but to dig into these sort of traditions and the strangeness that is in English art and culture. That's what he's responding to, but it's not the French surrealist.
No.
I don't think.
No. Given, he obviously passed away a little while ago, and it is relatively hard to see his works in any significant numbers. What do you think a sort of young emerging artist could take from examining Richard's works? How do you think his work might be developed and explored by a new generation of painters?
Well, looking at some of his paintings, and they are full of surprises. Every time, I'm not surprised that Philippa herself and her sister found themselves surprised when they began to rediscover all these paintings or to see things they hadn't seen before. He is a surprising artist. But I think one thing that a young artist might take strength from looking at his work is that the fact that they create a world of its own. Yes, the source material is based in things he knew about or in the war paintings that he'd been informed about through other means, but he manages to convert his subjects into a world of his own. And it is that sense of something becoming real out of material that is not necessarily real at the start. It's a sort of, bit of facts and so on, but to make something become alive and real, that's what he manages to do. I think that would be, for me as a young artist, very inspiring.
Finally, one thing which I think confounds a lot of people that I meet, particularly when they're engaging with an artist who has a long career. So this isn't specific almost to Richard, although it applies to him. It's just how, obviously, if you have somebody who's worked over the course of 60 years, their work is inevitably going to evolve and change over time, you know, and Richard's work certainly does. It goes through several evolutions, if you like. Do you think there's any single characteristic that links, say, a beach scene from the 1980s to one of the early imaginative landscapes or works from the 1920s?
I think right from the start, well, it's not actually early, it's 58 or something, but it goes back to his childhood in Bradford. It's near the start of the book, and Andrew calls it a conspectus of Bradford. All the things he remembered about Bradford, and Bradford at that period, which was many decades before, is caught in that picture. So rootedness in localism, in where he is now. And I think why he's so right for the current moment, of course, is that he hated traveling. And he just said that the view from my window is as much as I need. And so, and that he got visual indigestion if he traveled. So for those of us who are not able to do quite what we would like to do in the present climate, he's quite an inspiration.
But I think what we could do is probably invite Philippa back into the forum and maybe open things up a little bit. If anyone else wants to, I noticed we've got a couple of questions already teed up, one or two of which came earlier on in the presentation, so we might go back over old ground. I mean, one of the things that's that was raised is almost Richard's place within art history. Which artists, going back, you know, before the dawn of sort of modernism or 20th century, which artists did Richard look up to? What do you think his predecessors? Who do you think his predecessors were?
Are you asking me or?
Well, you primarily, because you might have had it from the horse's mouth. You know, is there other artists that he revered and spoke about?
Well, for instance, I think that beach with bathers owes something to Piero della Francesca in the construction of it. But of course, he was influenced by Turner principally, who he always proclaimed was his hero, but also Cézanne, who was deeply unfashionable when he was a student at the Slade.
Can I just come in an observation on that? Because yes, I mean, Patrick Heron says when he was at the Slade in the late 30s that one of the tutors was still saying, oh, Cézanne was just a hermit and he had a stigma. He'd had some problem with his eyes. He's not worth them spending time on. But this is, you know, we were so conservative about Cézanne. It wasn't true of everyone in England at that time, but there was this terrific delay in our appreciation of Cézanne in this country.
Well, wasn't Richard criticised whilst a student at the Slade for having fallen in with the modernists, Picasso and Braque and
and even apparently he states that painting the sea was frowned upon. In fact, and he sort of rather dismissively says. Talks about still lives with aspidistras and things, being the current mode, but
one of the questions that we had answer, and with the apologies to the person who asked this, but it was during our Q&A, Philippa, was Was the full range of your father, the diversity in your father's work, really apparent to you before you started embarking on both the catalogue resume project and the book, or you know, were you always aware of the sheer range of work, or did it come as a surprise to you?
Well, not completely, no, because part of the motivation for the book is to redress the balance from the concentration on his work as a war artist and the hyper sort of attention to detail that went on into the 50s. When he loosened up in the 60s and became quite an adventurous colorist in some ways for a short while anyway. I think he lost favour massively at that time, and we think it's an extremely exciting development, and we wanted to bring people along with us.
Yes.
Instead of alienating.
Well, we have a question which has just come in from Juliet Bly, who asks, what were Richard's influences in terms? Did he have strong religious or political views?
Well,
because that's quite interesting, because it isn't overly obvious from the work.
I mean, I have a few notes here, and there are lots and lots of things I meant to mention and haven't. But yes, he had slight scruples about accepting the being a war artist at the Admiralty, because he came from a Quaker background, which is of course pacifist. But he said as long as he wasn't having to strike any note of propaganda about the war, he was content to do it, because he was excited by it. I mean, everybody was, are they, at that period, visually.
Can I,
yes.
can I ask a question of Philippa? Jamie?
Yes.
I noticed that the music you played for the film, one piece was by Herbert Howells.
Yeah.
I just wondered if by any chance Richard Eurich knew Herbert Howells, because as you probably know, he too lost a child when his son died.
Well, I don't know, but the book that I played from was published in 1927, and Dad bought it in 1929. And,
yes.
and it's called Lambert's Clever. I suppose that's Constant Lambert. And, you know, I think, I don't know, because it's quite
some affinity there through the music and the art, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's an interesting thing to think about.
One of the questions which has just come in fact, I think it's been raised a couple of times now, is the idea of a kind of discourse. You described, Philippa, when we were talking, something about growing up, you know, with an artist, and perhaps it's surprising for some people that he did keep this kind of 9 to 5. Although, actually, funny enough, in my experience, that's not that uncommon, actually, funny enough. But did he ever discuss his painting with you? Did he ever? Were you ever part of that kind of creative discourse or process?
Well, he was pretty quiet about it on the whole, but he did say inspiration comes with working. You don't wait for it. By settling down and concentrating, after a while, something should happen. And both to Caroline and myself, when we were attempting painting, he would often say, when you think something's wrong in the picture, it's often not the thing itself, but the thing that's next to it, which we both found extremely true.
I saw a question come up, and it's disappeared from the view. Hang on, it's in a different. I'm just getting used to Zoom here myself, but it's something. Funnily enough, when I started working with you, I think I possibly asked you as well, which is this connection in some way to Lowry, and whether you know, there was ever any correspondence between the two of them. And I know where my confusion came from. It's because of Crispin, wasn't it? But yes. Perhaps you could.
My brother, who was
that question for Annie Glover.
Oh, right. Oh, yes. Well, I mean, my father he thought Lowry was great because he was another painter who just ploughed his own furrow and didn't take too much notice of what, you know, what the fashions were or anything like that. So he, a respected northerner.
I see. So more than having a great kinship with his work, it was more about the way he went about his work.
Difficult question to answer.
Yeah. Yes, we rather need him here for that one, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And I think there's a question that's just come in from Neil Calver, which is similarly problematic in that regard. In that Neil asked, did Richard consider that he would be revered after his death? Is it something that he thought about, I guess, his legacy?
I think he did, actually, because he had a great sense of a continuous tradition, particularly in sea painting, you know, from Van der Velde through Turner and to him, you know.
So that's something that Neil actually addresses in his question. He had a definite sense of his own position and his own worth.
So yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So he was, you know, he was very retiring, but there were certain things that he was quite sure about, you know.
The questions are starting to pour in a little bit here, so just give me a short second. Maybe Francis can interview Philippa, or the other way around.
Well, I was just thinking how wonderful it would be to have an exhibition of sea paintings.
Yes.
Up to your father, if not beyond, perhaps to Maggie Hambling's work.
Absolutely, yes, I saw her work.
A fantastic subject. Maybe it's all been already done, I don't know, but just sea painting.
I have to say, one of the things that links, we represent, as you know, a small number of artists' estates, and we work with a few people, very, very different artists, you know, from people like Dennis Crefeld, John Schuler. One of the things that linked all of the artists, or a great number of the artists, was this love of Turner. And much in the same way that I think Richard Cork's exhibition at the National Gallery linking David Bomberg's work with the Old Masters was yes. It was a fantastic, it should have been 5 times the size that it was, but it was a fantastic painting. To link up, you know, first-rate artists with their hero, and just see how those artists took individual things from one artist. It's actually quite an interesting project, I think.
Perhaps we could ask just a little bit more about him being a family man, because although he said somewhere, I think, of the sea, that it spoke to him because his love of loneliness, of obviously a man with, what, 3 children and wife and 3, is that right? 3 children?
Yes.
Wife and 3 children, was not exactly on his own, but there is something in his paintings that does convey this sense of quietness around him and a sort of almost loneliness. And yet I've noticed in some of the things that have popped up on the chat or wherever that there's at least a couple of descendants, grandchildren or something in the audience today. So there's a strong family attendance.
Excellent.
Right.
Yes, and it's one of his grandson's birthday, 13th birthday today, which is so it's a double celebration.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions which have just come in, which I think have been touched upon, but possibly not, you know, answered that fully. Jeremy Gardner's written about the Bradford School of Art producing a great number of interesting painters. And what way do you think this was formative? Let's just read this. Do you think it was formative in the development of his work? So I think, Francis, you mentioned this sense of place that he had, didn't you?
Yeah. But there's a wonderful quote, and unfortunately it's not the time to go for it, but in the book by J.B. Priestley about the impact of Bradford at that time, you know, that was pretty solidly confident of its role with the cloth industry, and that it wasn't that they were uninfluenced by London, they were just indifferent to it. And that sense of Yorkshiremen having men and women having such a strong sense of their own life and their own place in the world, that really this terrible drain of artistic talent to the metropolis that has gone on has been such a characteristic of the 20th century, and perhaps still today. It does show that the regions can produce some amazing talent, and it was a golden period, I think, at that time to grow up in Yorkshire. And of course his independence and so it has much to do, I think, with that, as well as the Quakerism in his back.
We touched upon the effect of the modernists, the abstract painters on Richard's, how he's perceived in art history. But going back to that question, you just think how many of those St Ives artists actually came from the Bradford, Leeds kind of area. There's quite a large number of them. Feeding into that, we have Fraser, who's asked, he lived at Dibden Purlo. Did he ever dream of living elsewhere? And if so, where would that have been? But again, that's something you touched on. Again, it's this sense of place and this idea that he never wanted to travel. But clearly, he made it from Bradford to Hampshire. So would he have gone one step further?
Well, I think Yorkshire was always the root of him. And I mean, what of course the New Forest brought from apart from the forest was the sea. And Bradford doesn't have the sea. But he was all interspersed with all the sea pictures and, Southampton pictures and things like that.
Yeah.
Every now and again, there'd be another Yorkshire one straight out of his head.
Yes.
He didn't need to go back there necessarily. Because
a lot of those, the large scale, I think we have one in our own show, a particularly large, nominally Yorkshire landscape, which has been adorned with kind of classical ruins and these sort of things as well.
Oh, yes.
It's
sort of quarry-like almost.
Yes.
You also talked, Philippa, about that you were told by your mother that the family was very poor, and then you listed all the things that you did not have, which for today's audience must seem incredible. But there is also that detail in the book about Richard going to collect his OBE, wearing a suit from Oxfam,
yes,
a borrowed tie.
yes,
not up in top hat and tails or anything like that. Yes.
And yet, they would save up and buy books and other people's art. I mean, he bought an Epstein sculpture and a Christopher Wood painting. But
I find that the Christopher Wood connection, I think, is really interesting. The very first picture that we saw in your video, that painting owes to me, perhaps not a debt, but the comparison with Christopher Wood was quite stark. And some of Richard's slightly stranger compositions remind me of the very, very, very end of Christopher Wood's own career, where he was beginning to experiment with some quite peculiar juxtapositions in his paintings. Yeah. And in terms of comparing Richard with contemporary artists, I think artists like Christopher Wood is a more valid comparison than someone like Lowry that crops up more regularly. I don't know if that's fair.
He had that lovely phrase, didn't he, that Christopher Wood painted like a bird sings, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Remember that, Philippa? It's wonderful. I mean, that innate feeling for the material, the medium that he's using, and the capacity to put on canvas what it is he wants to say about the thing he's looking at, without fussing about, anxieties over this or that, is a wonderful and very accurate description of Christopher Wood's painting at a certain time.
Yeah.
Dad was full of admiration for how, in his very short life, he had gone through quite a lot of sort of modernist sort of ideas.
He covered a lot of ground in 9 years, yes.
And then come out completely free as himself. Yeah. And he thought that was just amazing.
Neil Calver asked a question which I think is quite interesting because it ties in with a lot of things that we've been discussing. He says here, lucky him, I have his beautiful painting of a horse and rainbow. Did he see his children's paintings as being an important part of his oeuvre? Or did he see them as a diversion, perhaps for his children's pleasure? It's kind of a bit of both, isn't it, Philippa? What do you think?
He loved painting pictures for children. And in fact, after the war, there was that far-sighted idealist scheme to place pictures in schools for children so that they would have the actual experience of looking at real original art And when you say, are there some pictures that we would like to find? Well, we were contacted by one teacher in a school who'd found a Eurich in a broom cupboard with a hole through the canvas, So that one has been rescued and restored, and it was amazingly exciting. But we have one or two black and white photographs of pictures that Dad did for schools and were distributed around. But with the dissolution of that idea, they've disappeared, and I just hope they're in really good homes, and that one day we will see them.
Philippa, we've had Mary Montague Scott, sorry, apologies, get in touch, and she's finding this all rather tricky because her eye is constantly diverted over your shoulders to look at the Richard Eurichs, which I have to say somewhat better.
Well, there's the landscape of cows over the piano.
Yeah, and she just wonders, yes, if there's any one of the ones behind you that particularly appeals, and that you
it's in the book. That one. And it was in the film. It's a 60s picture, and the paint is so free and and sort of suggestive. There's just like a flick of the brush, and that's a cow, and you can tell it is. And it's just an amazing picture.
What about your own career, growing up in the wake of your father? And was it difficult to avoid being too influenced by him, or did you welcome his example?
Well, I decided I wouldn't be an artist myself. I did an English degree, and then after my husband died very young, I became a woodwind teacher for Hampshire, but so I sort of trod all these other paths. But I must say, at the back of my mind, well, it's not in my mind, it's in my being, was the influence of Dad and his vision. I mean, we're always saying that if we've been looking at some of his pictures and then you go out for a walk and you keep saying, oh, that's a Richard Eurich painting, it's amazing, again and again, particularly figures on beaches, of course.
I also sort of interject at this point. I had the great pleasure of meeting last night somebody that you taught clarinet to.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So he was
I hope that wasn't too much of a disaster.
Well, in amongst us singing Richard's praises, a little congratulations to you there.
That's lovely.
There's a question here. Clearly, things we've touched upon it before. Again, with his repeated depiction of ships and boats. Did he like going to sea or sailing, or was it just the observational side of things? Was it just
when he was young, when he was a boy, he had a cousins who lived in Weymouth, and he used to go down, which was the first time that he was at Chesil Beach, and the amazingness of that. But they used to go sailing, and I don't know how good a sailor he was, except I know he never got seasick. And he talked about, this structure of water thing. He said that he could look at a gap through the rigging, so that it was just a little sort of square, and he could observe the water and the patterns it made, and it was all limited in that square instead of, there's the whole sea out there. And he could encapsulate his study of the structure of the water in that way.
But it's not just water, it's everything when you look into the detail, like the one we were shown in the film of two men helping a rather large gentleman into the door of a house.
Oh, yes. Bradford.
A lot. Yeah.
What I find interesting, particularly when we put together the show of the later works last year, was the different treatments of the sea, and it's got nothing to do with periods within his career. It's not early works versus late works. These would be pieces that were done relatively at a very similar time, but occasionally he would treat the sea with very, very sort of thin, delicate glazes. and other times there would be really quite a rigorous, thick impasto. And it's that which I find quite interesting. There was no he recognised the moods in the sea, didn't he? There was no fixed way of depicting it. It was an emotional response, but also physical observation of the changes in the surface, I guess. So he was obviously quite transfixed by it all.
Yes, absolutely.
Ben Whitworth asks about where he can go and see Richard's works. Now, clearly, come and see us. But I know that you've been in touch with a lot of public collections because of the book project and trying to source works. And through that, do you have any idea of where a good selection of works can be currently viewed?
Well, Bradford, of course, has got 10 or 11. I've lost count.
Are they up?
Well, that's what I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's no harm in looking at Art UK, which I think there's about 110 pictures of Dad's.
And Leeds has one of the only survivor of the torpedo.
Yes, Leeds has that one.
Yeah, I mean, one can always,
as you said, Nottingham with the Men of Straw. But of course, the castle in Nottingham is being done up at the moment, so that won't be available for another year. And Southampton Art Gallery has got some wonderful Eurichs. And
possibly the result of David Brown, who used to work at the
he left one in particular.
Well, what we need is a good retrospective.
Indeed.
A Eurich retrospective.
I mean, with that in mind, if you could have your pick of venues, irrespective of whether they have any works by Richard in their collection, of all the museums that you visited and public spaces that is there one that you think where his show would look particularly?
Well, I think the Tate should put on an exhibition.
Yeah.
They've got 5 extremely wonderful pictures.
Well, we should lobby them for that.
Yes, definitely.
Or the Royal Academy, given that he was.
Yes, and oh God, that hasn't even had a mention. Oh, trouble. Yes.
Well, I think that's possibly a good place to reintroduce Lucy to help possibly sum things up. We've possibly gone a little over where we were, but we've had some lovely questions coming in. So we welcome back Lucy now to the panel.
Thank you, Jamie, and it was a pleasure to listen to you. So thank you for the very long and engaged conversation. So just really to round things off, to say a very big thank you to all of our panelists for a really fascinating conversation, which certainly has encouraged me to look at a lot of the paintings again and to think further about Eurich. And I wanted particularly also to thank Waterhouse Dodd and the estate of Richard Eurich for collaborating with us on this wonderful online book launch. And a big thank you to everybody for being there, even though we can't see you. Thank you for all your questions. I have to show the book. Don't forget that it is available to buy from our website, lundhumphries.com, £40, including postage if you're in the UK. And Jamie, your exhibition, I think, continues until the 2nd of October.
Yes, although we'll, as obviously as representatives, we'll always have a good selection here. After the exhibition closes, the paintings aren't going anywhere. Apart from the loans, I promise to return yours, Philippa.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everybody. We have been recording this event, so it will be available to watch to anyone who's here or who missed it. And I think we'll be emailing everybody who was here today with a link to the recording. That's it for now. Thank you very much.